Okay, so today we're going to be talking about specifically poetry annotation. Now, that means essentially making notes on or about a poem. Sit up and open your eyes. All right, and you're going to want to write this down because you're going to use this for homework today. Now, um, the reason we annotate poetry is to essentially allow us to better understand it because poetry can be kind of confusing and weird, right? And I feel like something else that can be confusing and weird is Shakespeare, right? I think I'm pretty correct on that. And that's okay because Shakespearean plays are kind of poetic. He wrote them in blank verse. He, used iambic pentameter. Sometimes he rhymes. So a lot of the stuff he does is very poetic. On the board, I'll give you a copy in just a second. It's one of his sonnets. A sonnet is a poem, 14 lines, right? Two stanzas. It's got a 12-line stanza and then a 2-line couplet as the second stanza. It's a love poem. So the goal here today is when we're dealing with complex texts like Shakespeare, we need to know how to read them. We need to know how to slow ourselves down and get a little bit closer and a little bit more intimate with the text. So I'm going to pass out to you in just a second this sonnet, and we're going to go through together today and learn how to annotate it and learn how to read the sonnet, all right, which is Shakespeare. This is a Shakespearean sonnet, one of his 158 that he published. And then what we're going to do is turn this around on Macbeth, okay, and see how we can apply it there. So I'm passing these out for you guys. You will keep these. You will mark them up. So don't just, not pay attention to them. Delete them. All right, so you guys have sonnet 130, which was written to what we collectively know nowadays as the Dark Lady. This is one of Shakespeare's mistresses. Now, he wrote 158 sonnets, so this is in his second, or the end, the end of kind of his sonnet writing career, I guess. Interesting thing to know, Shakespeare had 3 mistresses over time, but one of them was a mastress, not a mistress. The second mistress he had was a dude. But we also know that he wrote one sonnet wishing that the guy was a girl. So we don't know if there was a physical relationship there or whether he was, drawn to the guy mentally, psychologically, or emotionally some way and kind of just wished the guy was a female because, I don't know, we don't know. But we also know this is a very different era. And the ideas of sexuality and whatnot were vastly different in this time. But anyway, I'm going to write you guys down, or have you guys write down the 5 steps that it takes to poetry annotation. We're going to go through them together. Now, the first step is to read the poem out loud and mark the rhyme scheme. All right? So you're going to be reading the poem out loud here in just a minute, and you're going to mark the rhyme scheme. Now, the reason we read the poem out loud is because poems aren't meant to be just written down and never read out loud. They're actually written down just to record them. Poetry itself is an oral art form. All right? Poetry came about not only to tell stories, but also to allow people to memorize those stories much easier and pass them around. That's we have the Odyssey and the Iliad. That's how we have Gilgamesh. That's how we have Beowulf and the Canterbury Tales. They were only really written down because otherwise people might forget them. They were truly supposed to be read out loud. Same with Shakespearean sonnets. So, here's what we're going to do because I know that reading a poem that's kind of complex like this one can be nerve-wracking. All right? Everybody's going to stand up here in a minute. And you're going to find a spot on the wall. And you're going to read to the wall. Because the wall don't care how good a reader you are. Okay? So everybody, raise yourselves from your seats and move to a spot on the wall. Once you found your wall, buddy, Pedro's taking quite the journey from her.
You go yell at me and yell for that.
They'll yell at you? You're mean.
See? So?
All right. So on 3, you're going to start reading to the wall. And you're going to read to the wall. 1, 2, 3. See, the wall didn't make fun of you. The wall didn't, laugh at how terribly you read that sonnet or anything. So there's no worries, right? The wall doesn't care. Now, the second part of this is finding the rhyme scheme. Now, this is kind of odd. I don't know how many of you have taken like a creative writing class or a poet or, even know how to do a rhyme scheme. So we're going to do this together. Essentially, what you do when you do a rhyme scheme is you tie an ending sound to a letter. So obviously, what letter would we start with? A, absolutely. So if sun is A, does sun rhyme with red? No. The answer is no. Good job. All right. So what should red be then? B. But then done is A, and head B. Good job. So the first 4 lines are A, B, A, B. Now we go into white. That's a new one. So, and cheeks, D. And it goes another C, D. What do you think the next 4 are? E, F, E, F. How about the last 2? G, G. Somebody knows the Shakespearean sonnets. Good. Awesome. Thank you. That's awesome. This makes it so much easier on me. So this allows me to then move on from that because I don't really care about the rhyme scheme because rhyme schemes are annoying. But I do want to let you guys know a little bit about how a Shakespearean sonnet is set up. Do we know about the turn? Okay, then this is new information. Sonnets, whether they're Shakespearean or Italian, all have 14 lines, and they all have something we call a turn. Now, in an Italian sonnet, the turn comes after the 8th line and before the last 6 lines, which is the second stanza, right? So an octet and sextet in a Italian sonnet. In this one, we have 12 lines and then the turn. That's why we have the GG at the end. It's not because the game's over and we're saying good game. It's because it's a couplet, and a couplet rhymes. So, let's go ahead and just put a line here. You guys don't have to do this necessarily. I'm just put a line here to kind of represent it. If you wish to, you can. It will make your paper a little bit more cluttered today, but it won't hurt you. So, that turn, what we do in a sonnet, what the poem or the poet does, is they really hit one big idea in those first half of the sonnet, the first part of the sonnet. And then the turn flips that idea on its head and really teaches us what he's really saying, or she. All right? And you'll see what this means in a minute. But essentially, we do a 180 on what we're saying, and somewhere within that 180, somewhere after that, we get a little bit more of an understanding. All right? We get the true meaning of the poem. Now, here's the deal. Italian sonnets, you only have 8 lines to set up this opposite kind of thing, but then you have 6 lines to explain it, right? In a Shakespearean sonnet, you set up an idea for 12 lines, and you have 2 lines to explain it. It's pretty crazy. There are also things called undefinable sonnets. Undefinable sonnets we're not going to really go over. You'll get some next year when we do a poetry unit, assuming you take just regular English 12. Um, Undefinables are interesting because they don't really adhere to the rules 100%. All right? They might not go 8 and 6 or 12 and 2. They might not be about love. Sonnets are traditionally love poems, all right? A good example of this is Percy Shelley. Um, his poem Osmandius. Osmandius is an indefinable sonnet. Um, you might have heard of parts of Osmandius if you're a fan of Watchmen. Adrian Veidt, the bad guy in Watchmen, who was the superhero Osmandius, uses that poem as part of his inspiration for his character. So Osmandius was also Ramses III, the pharaoh. So there you go. Anyway, we're not going to get too far into that now. We're going to go on to the second step of poetry annotation. And this is kind of a longer step, so make sure you pay attention when I say it, all right? Identify the following by underlining. All right, so you're going to underline the following things: figurative language, images, symbols, and sound devices. I will keep repeating that, don't worry. Identify the following: figurative languages, images, symbols, and sound devices. Figurative language, images, symbols, sound devices. Those four things you're going to underline. Okay? Now, when you underline them, this is where annotation gets kind of interesting. You can just take your pencil and underline. But as you develop poetry annotation skills, and you can apply a lot of this stuff to novels and regular prose as well. But as you kind of develop these skills, you might start doing some things your own way. You might use colors, color code figurative language, color code images, color code symbols, color code sound devices, and that's fine. That might just make it better for you. In fact, when I annotate poetry or read my own poetry outside of school, I don't do it this exact method. I started out initially with this exact method, but I've since then kind of personalized it. So as you get better at this, feel free to do that. But today, I'd like you guys to kind of follow along with this. So what you're going to do here is you're going to annotate. All right? I want you guys to underline those things. Figurative language, remember, is language that forms a picture in our head. Okay? Images and symbols. Well, images are things that we're supposed to imagine. Symbols are things supposed to represent something. And sound devices. Now, we already have the rhyme scheme, so you might not need to worry about the sound device otherwise, because there's not really anything that's alliterative or whatever in this, okay? So take a few seconds to go through and do this. Bless me. Okay. So we've underlined things now. Now, what I've underlined up here, you don't have to underline that same thing. That's the beauty of this. The way you read this poem is probably vastly different from the way that I read this poem versus the way Mr. Birdsall would read this poem or Miss Childs would read this poem, okay? I'm going to read it a little bit differently because of my personal experiences, my background, my inner crazy thoughts, right? You're all much more sane than me, so you're not going to read this the same way I am. And you're blessed, okay? Trust me. But let's move on to step 3. Now you're going to circle things, okay? You're going to circle any of the part of the poem that stands out, confuses you, or that you find important. Go ahead and write that down. Any part of the poem that stands out, confuses you, or you find important, you're going to circle. All right? Make sense? So circle any part that stands out, confuses you, or you find important. Go ahead and do that once you've written that down. Guys, I want you to keep in mind the only reason I used a different color is because we're on a computer screen up here. But like I said, if you want, when you start doing this on your own, to use a different color, now would be the time to do it because you're doing a different task. Okay, step 4. Step 4 is just is continuing kind of along the lines of marking it up, right? So we're annotating, we're making notes on. So you're going to write questions in the margins, highlight unusual words, and mark phrases that indicate meaning. Write this stuff down. If you're not writing this down, you're not going to be able to do the homework. Write questions in the margin, highlight unusual words, mark phrases that indicate meaning.
What was the last thing you said?
Mark phrases that indicate the poem's meaning. So phrases mean obviously small groups of more than one word, right? So go ahead and do that once you've written that down. Okay, so we've taken our time to do that. You might still be going, and I know it's kind of hard to highlight right now without a highlighter. You can just put brackets around a word or something like that, or use a little star or whatnot. The final part, this is the last step, all right, is to write down what you think the theme is at the top of the page, all right? Write down the theme, and then draw arrows to parts of the poem that support that. Got it? Now, sorry to rush you, but in the interest of time, if we look at the screen now, the screen's covered. I mean, there's a lot of markings up there. In fact, it makes it kind of hard to read in places. And most likely for a lot of you, your paper is beginning to look kind of cluttered as well, right? If I had to ask you guys to write down the theme or to tell me what you said, how many of you would pick the same thing? One, maybe two, not many, right? So what we've just discovered is we're all going to interpret this poem differently. But do you have proof, according to you or the rest of you, that yours is different than mine? Yeah, you've circled all this stuff, you've highlighted things, you've underlined things. Now we know that there's different opinions. Okay? Any questions on that?